Hey everyone, welcome to another mix breakdown video. In this one, I'm talking about a song that I mixed with the artist Sabrina Song called Strawberry. And I'm really excited about this one because for the first time ever, I'm actually joined by the artist to talk not only about the mix, but about the song's writing and production and arrangement and everything that went into making it. So really excited for this one. Just a couple things before we jump in. First, this being the first video of hopefully many videos like this, it was not without its technical difficulties. So we actually had to record over 2 separate days, and there are some issues here and there with my microphone audio. So bear with me on those things. Hopefully, as I do more of these videos, those technical kinks will get ironed out. The second, much more important thing is that Sabrina's new EP is out for everyone to hear. Really excited about this one. I worked on all the songs with Sabrina, and yeah, so there's a link to that in the description. And if you're unfamiliar with the rest of Sabrina's discography, I also highly encourage you to check that out. You can find all the projects we've worked on together at my website, which is also in the description, or you can find her full discography on her Spotify, Tidal, Apple Music page, wherever you listen to your music. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Sabrina Song about her song Strawberry. Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to a very special installation of my mix breakdown series. Today I'm joined by an amazing artist, performer, songwriter, producer, engineer, arranger, Sabrina Song. She is a frequent collaborator of mine, and we are going to talk about a song that we mixed together of hers called Strawberry. So welcome, Sabrina.
Thank you for having me. That was so many nice labels for
Well,
me.
you wear a lot of hats. um, well, so I want to just get started by, I think the best way to do it is just to, I think I want to listen to the rough mix first, and then we can just kind of talk about it and talk about, yourself as an artist and a producer and sort of your approach with this song. But I just want to get going just playing audio. So I don't want to play the whole thing, but maybe through like the first, maybe into the second verse.
Yeah.
This is for everybody. This is what Sabrina sent to me, as a reference for a direction for me to go with mixing. So here is Strawberry.
Strawberry, California, 7 hours on the plane. I'm still thinking about you. I'm still thinking about you. Who's the last one you'd expect walking in the lobby door? I'm still thinking it'd be you. I'm still thinking it'd be you. Drape me, palate cleanse, I crave a compromise. You're not allowed to haunt me. You'll find someone else's mind. Soothe me selfishly, I crave a little time. I'll put down my devices, I'll cry for half life. Fragile like a newborn, like a puddle at his feet. He soothed me with his kindness, so soft I couldn't speak. Loving.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to get to that background vocal part. So amazing. So tell me, I guess first I'm just curious sort of what this song is about. Like where did it come from? Tell me about the writing process a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny because this song, like lyrically, kind of is describing like what I was doing when I was writing it,
Mm-hmm.
also, which was um my friend who I write and produce with a lot, and one of my best friends, Emma Body, is from Northern California, from San Francisco. And I was visiting her at home for the first time and was across the country from New York, which is where I live and where I'm from, and was like over the phone just dealing with a rough patches in like multiple relationships in my life, and was thinking a lot about like setting boundaries and like kind of being at a point in my life that feels like I'm really fully transitioned into like adulthood and like
Mm.
just what I want that to look like for me, but was dealing with all of it when I was trying to have this like kind of nice vacation like trip. And we were in Strawberry, uh, California,
I did
which
not know
is
that was a place.
a lot of people just think of saying Strawberry,
I totally,
but it
that's totally what I thought.
it's like very small. It seems more like a village, like confines.
Sure.
Like I'm from the village of Brightwaters, which is in a town, but it's very small. But we went to a Starbucks and it said strawberry Starbucks. And then I was just like, huh, because later when we flew from northern to southern California, I started writing this song and just on the plane. And so that's why it starts the way it does, and was kind of just thinking about what it's like to like communicate with people and how like doing it over the phone things can get misconstrued and like all of that stuff.
Did it, I guess to me, like sonically, it's a happy song. Like, is it sort of, how am I trying to say this? Like, to me, it feels like almost cathartic. Like there's this sort of like development that happens over the course of this song. Like, is that sort of how you envision it? Like, it's like this is like my sort of like entry into adulthood and like becoming sort of myself. Am I reading into it too
Yeah,
much?
no, that's 100% true. I think it's funny because it obviously is not like a happy song, but it's kind of like the way the song feels sonically is like matches the scenery of like where I was and how
Yeah.
I like could have felt on the trip, but then like lyrically it was like my inner monologue.
Yeah.
Because it was just like the places we were go visiting, it was just like the most beautiful uh like beaches and like the valley of this mountain on this drive. And I was like, I'm on my phone. Like this is so
Yeah.
frustrating. But it definitely, like if you were just listening to the instrumental, was kind of just definitely sounds happier because I was in such like a it was just like a really nice time. And then almost like the lyrics were my thoughts that were interrupting like this nice
Yeah.
time. So it's definitely intentional that kind of have like a conflict of the two. But also I think the sentiment of the song isn't like bitter. It's more like hopeful
Yeah.
and like uh standing my ground rather than like this sucks
Yeah.
sentiment. So
So tell me, like, you said you started writing on the plane. Like to me, I just because of the instrumentation, like I feel like I picture you just sitting down at a piano, like plunking it out. Like, is that how it came to you? Were you composing on the piano or?
well, this is like a crazy thing that I do, and it's like I always try to fight against it, but it just seems to be the way my brain works, which is I have the most clarity and like time to think and creative ideas when I'm in transit
Hmm,
away from any tools. And so I'm coming up with the lyrics and melody like almost kind of like an a cappella song because I'm on a bike or I'm on the subway, I don't have an instrument. And then I have to like write the song underneath it. And it's like I hear what the chords should sound like in my head, but I'm not
yeah.
sure exactly what key I'm in or exactly what the chords will be while I'm like writing. So I was really just actually on the plane, wrote nearly the whole thing with like was able to sing this lead vocal out loud, but then
On
had
the
to go
plane.
back, yeah, on the plane
Oh, cool.
and then figure out the key and chords and match what I had pictured in my head to like once I was in front of a piano.
Right.
So
And
that just
so
ends up being a lot of how my songs come together. Sorry.
no, well, so I was gonna ask. So that's amazing. But you recorded your vocals. So like or do you just internalize the melodies? Like you remember them?
I usually voice memo it. There has been a
Okay.
time or two where I think I can remember it and I never can, like the
Yeah.
exact way when I'm coming up with it. So I just try to make a voice memo. And then, like, once we even got to LA, I think that day or the next day, I started just putting down some bass instrumentation because I knew I was excited about it.
And you were with Emma, but is this entirely self-produced, or did she help you with the writing and production?
It's fully self produced and I wrote it, but I remember playing it for her in like its earliest stages, and she definitely changed a chord voicing or two. She's
Yeah.
always hearing chords when she's listening to things, and that was super helpful.
Nice. So okay, so you write the melody and the lyrics, and then
Mhm.
the next step is piano.
Yeah, sometimes it's not every song, like this song, yes, and a lot of mine are like that. But if I do have a piano in front of me or a guitar, I like to write and figure out the chords as I go too, because obviously it's like a little bit annoying to have to do it in reverse. But yeah, a lot of the time it just feels like that's the most natural
Yeah,
way that I write a song.
yeah. So okay, so you have an outline on piano, you have a melody and lyrics. I assume you're
Hmm.
tweaking stuff here and there, but like generally you have it all laid out.
Yeah.
And then you're producing it. And I guess I'm just curious, like, are you how sort of like intellectualized are you when you how intellectualized are your productions? Like, are you saying, oh well, this song is about XYZ. You know, I'm making this production choice because of this sort of lyrical theme or whatever, or is it just sort of more spontaneous and less thought out? Is it just you know what I mean?
Yes, I think it's like more spontaneous, but subconsciously is like embedding things because I find that when people ask me about it later, I'm always able to explain it, but it's not like I was
Mm,
explicitly like thinking I'm going to put this here to like evoke that emotion. You know what I
yeah,
mean? And I think for this song, I actually feel like it kind of pushed me as a producer because I needed to practice restraint. Like I was talking about this recently, but I feel like when I first started producing, I felt this need to like prove I was a producer, like prove I could
yeah,
produce, and was like purposefully trying to put things in tracks almost like subconsciously where people would be like, the production is so cool. And
yeah,
like, I really felt like this was meant to be a simple song. And it was kind of, I sat with it for a long time before I sent it to you for mixing because I kept being like, does this need more? But I didn't want to just add things for the sake of producing. Like I was trying to like serve the song. And I think that's something I've gotten better at over time. But I definitely knew this was like a narrative, kind of like lyric driven song,
yeah.
and had like some references in mind, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But
Yeah, we'll talk
yeah.
about that. I mean, to that point, like one of the things I was just like messing around with the session before we started. Like one of the things that is so great about this song, and one of the things that I felt like was really important to preserve in the mix was how sort of like direct and unencumbered each instrumental element is. It's like here's a drum set like sounding exactly like a drum set. Here's a bass, like you can hear every
Mhm.
little articulation. Like um I guess that's element separation, but it's also just arrangement. And I was going through and muting stuff, and certain things are obvious when you mute them, like the pianos, but then there are some synths and like the guitar underneath where it's like when you mute it, it sounds like it completely changes the song. It's like everything
Mhm.
feels very foundational, if you know what I mean. It's just like it's almost like one big rhythm section and then your vocal on top, you know.
Definitely.
Yeah. We can talk about the rough mix. I have that document pulled up here on my other computer. Um, just for people listening, like if you're familiar with the format of some of these other videos that I've done, um, my goal with this one is not to go through individually and sort of talk about every little thing that I did in terms of mix because I think that would be boring. Um, but I'm curious about all this production stuff because I want to contextualize a lot of mixed stuff through the lens of your production approach.
Mhm.
I think so. So what I'm looking at now is a document. I have all of my clients send me basically before I mix a document just spelling out things that they like about the rough mix, things that they want to improve, and then any reference tracks and specific things about those reference tracks that works well that they want me to either emulate or sort of take into consideration. So I have here, you sent me two songs. One was Caroline by Arlo Parks, and you wrote, there's something garbled and messy about this mix, but the different textures and ebb and flow feels very emotional and purposeful. You said, I love how her light vocal floats above the rest of the instrumental. So I feel like that definitely speaks to what I was just saying about
Mhm.
there being sort of this sort of foundational rhythm section. I'm not going to play the song just because of copyright stuff, but
Mhm.
and the other song that you sent was "Hurting Kind" by Del Water Gap. You said, I really like the sound of this lead vocal. Love how the song plays with silence and mixes and balances dry and wet really well. Starts simple and dry like Strawberry and slowly builds to the engulfing last chorus. Has a growl and messiness to it, but when it strips down to the core elements, it's very clean. And then notes for your mix, going into my mixing, you wrote a lot of the stems don't have dry and wet versions for the song, and you said I kept everything on the drier side in the mix, particularly the drums. I feel like it suits the song best, but I'm open to your interpretation. From a mix perspective, I'm definitely interested in talking about this because it's something that I like run into a lot. Just the idea of dryness versus wetness, and making sure that like even if something is very direct and upfront, that there's still reverb and delay. I think a lot of people would be surprised, like if they soloed up the vocal of a pop track that feels very dry and direct, to
Mhm.
hear how much reverb and delay there is actually going on. So I'm curious, like before listening to a portion of the finished mix, and then we can kind of talk about specifics, and I'll ask you about sort of different instrumental subgroupings and stuff like that. Um, how sort of far did you take it with your rough mix? Like you're pretty meticulous, right? I would assume that mixing is sort of part of the production for you.
Yeah, it's funny because it's like that's one of the reasons I love working with you is like I'm I'm all of this is like in my hands from start to finish as far as the best mix I can get it before I give it to you. And that's why I think it's really important that I have someone else mix it because like I don't have the ability to see the song with fresh eyes or fresh ears.
Yeah,
And maybe hear things that are going on that another I'm not like a mixer, but a mixer or someone else would be like, oh, this has been obviously too loud or obviously needs this change. And I fear that if I were to try to mix everything myself also, which I've never thought about doing, that I would not be able to have like good clarity in my judgment because
yeah,
I have my hands in everything. Um, so I think when I was talking about like the dry and wet and everything, it's like I can get the mix as I get it as far as to the point where I feel good listening to it. I feel good playing it for people. Usually that's what I'm sending around for like other purposes before the mix is done. And then I see the mixing process and like working with you as like kind of just that final pillar that really like gets it to the absolute best place it could be. And gives it a new like gets a new set of eyes and ears on it and allows like my holes that I still feel like are missing in the mix to be filled by someone who just has a more technical understanding of like mix techniques and maybe could hear some things that I'm not hearing and know how to fix them.
yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that because, like, from my perspective, that documentation that people send, like, with some people, it's more important than others.
Mhm.
Like with you, I feel like because the mix acts as such an aesthetic blueprint that I can listen to it and know all the things I want to do, and know where it needs to go, because that's just indicated in your rough mix. Obviously I'm taking into account the documentation, but just listening down, like I said, like I know that keeping everything dry and up front just makes sense for the arrangement, having everything sort of just like revolving around that backbeat and the quarter note, like that's all
Mhm.
really, that just is naturally feels important just by listening to your mix. So
And I
um,
think that's actually one of the things I've thought about is like the benefit of one of like the random benefits of producing my stuff or like maybe being the only person working on it is like I feel like I hear sometimes from artists who don't produce or like they handed the whole song off for production is that I feel like sometimes people think that things problems will be solved in the mix. And I
yeah,
think that's why a lot of I mean like you would know better than me, but why a lot of people end up just never being satisfied or feeling like a mix is done is because it's actually an issue that is present in the song or the
totally.
production. And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
I know like I know and now from working with you more and more and writing and just making over time. Like I'm like the mix is only gonna brighten and polish and like fix some sonic things that I crave. But like if I'm not happy with the song in the form I'm sending it to you, like I'm probably not going to be happy with the mix, you know? So I think I've also tried to mix it to the best point I can just to make sure that the song feels done, like,
Yeah.
and feels listenable, or else I'm like relying on the mix to like make me happy about it or excited about it.
Well, and I feel like I say this a lot um to people when I talk about mixing. Like, I sort of break mixes into different categories. Like, there are the songs that I don't necessarily like, and where the sounds themselves just need a lot of help. And generally, I try not to work on those projects. And then there are projects where um, the the song is really good, the arrangement's really good, the production's good, but the sound, there are just issues with, either the vocals were recorded really poorly, or there's a bunch of I don't know, noise, or just like the sounds aren't great. And then
Mhm.
there's like the third category where the arrangement's great, the production's great, the writing's great, and the sounds are really great, and they just need that last 10% or that last 20%. And I feel like a lot of people think that, you know, that at that point mixing isn't worth it. You know what I mean? Because like, oh well, if
Mhm.
they're only improving it, a little bit, then what's the point? But obviously, from my perspective, those songs are always the most fun to work on. And by the way, I should say this is one of those songs, like where the sounds are really good, and
Thank you.
and I just felt like I just could elevate them.
Mhm.
But it's like it's this weird thing where it's like the better source material I have, the better the mix is, and the better the end result is. And so I feel like that's
Mhm.
always what I get from you, is just really quality tracks.
Thank you.
All right, so let's maybe just listen down to my mix for maybe about the same amount, and then we
Yeah.
can get into specifics. So here's what I did.
Strawberry, California, 7 hours on the plane. I'm still thinking about you. I'm still thinking about you. Who's the last one you'd expect walking in the lobby door? I'm still thinking it'd be you. I'm still thinking it'd be you. Drain me, palate cleanse, I crave a compromise. You're not allowed to haunt me, you'll find someone else's mind. Soothe me selfishly, I crave a little time. I'll put down my devices, I'll cry for half the flight. Fragile like a newborn, like a puddle at his feet. He soothed me with his kindness, so soft I couldn't speak. Loving.
Okay, cool. It's funny just watching us like bob our heads.
I know.
Well, so
I'm
cool.
like, this sounds good.
Yeah. Um, I want to jump in just from the drums. Typically when I mix, I start with drums and bass and make sure that relationship is working.
Mm,
But so just talk to me about these drums. Obviously, these are well, actually not so obviously, but I can tell you now, you listener,
mhm.
like these are programmed drums, although presumably live samples. Um, Talk to me about that a little bit. Like, what's your approach with drum programming? Was your intention to make these sound as real as possible, or to sort of walk the line? Like, what does that look
I
like for you?
know. It's actually something I've been thinking about a lot. And I was actually thinking about when we were getting ready to do this today, how I was like kind of outing myself of this, these, like using like I've never used like that much of a sampled loop in a
Mm,
song, but it was one of those things where like I was like, oh, I love this it's a live drum sample. Let me just keep it for now. And then it was like the more I worked on the song, I was like, I can't imagine taking this out.
yeah.
And so I was like, I don't want to get rid of it just for the sake of feeling like I shouldn't use this. And then also I think I ended up adding like layering them, and like I think the bass really helped me feel like I got that live feeling that I wanted. I think in truth, like moving forward, I would like to just live record drums on songs like this, but it just like wasn't in the cards to get this finished. And I really did like the way it sounded. So I normally I feel like my songs mostly have a more programmed sound. Doors, those were live drum sounds I recorded
Mhm.
and then made a loop out of. And this was just live drum samples that I was using to create like a live sound, but I know you can I don't think it sounds like they were recorded live by like for the song.
Yeah.
So I think it like rides the line. And I feel like the production as the song goes on kind of rides the line too.
Well, yeah. Well, see, I, I'm not when I listen to it. I don't wish they sounded different. Like, right, like they work perfectly for the
Right.
song, and I'm not, wondering like, oh, are these programmed or are these live? I don't think about it, but it is interesting. I feel like in a lot of your songs, you do walk this line between like sort of like organic and synthesized or artificial, and that
Hmm.
in a way that's really compelling. Like, we didn't listen to the sort of outro instrumental section, but those horns,
Hmm.
which I assume are a synth or a patch or
Yeah.
something. Um, they don't quite sound real, but they don't quite sound fake. I think
Hmm.
that's like very interesting, and I kind of feel like the drums are doing a similar thing, and it suits the song. But so let's maybe solo some of that up. So the main one you're talking about is this main loop down here. So I can play that unprocessed. Um, So I can look at what I'm doing. I mean, again, I don't want to get too much into sort of like technical nitty gritty, but basically, my approach with these was to add saturation in a way that um, would sort of make them feel a little more randomized, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like one of the cool things about bus compression on drums, um, or entire kits like this is that one the attack transient of one element will sort of influence how another element distorts because they're all kind of in the same like sonic soup, so to speak. So like when the kick drum hits, like it does this clampy thing to the hi-hat. Um, and it's those sort of like unique relationships that kind of makes it feel a little more live to me. So basically I think I'm getting all of that from this tape emulation plugin, and you can see I'm just like cranking the record level, and then bringing it back down on the playback level. Um, and usually I play around with the tape types on these and the tape speed. But here's without that. And then with. You can hear like that kick drum just kind of like splatting a little bit more. So that's that. And then, going back to this sort of like program versus sampled stuff, like you have this kick and snare that are very just. Oh, whoops, hold on. I'm still soloing that loop. Right, like obviously those sound super programmed, but the combination of that main loop that I just played and then this hi-hat loop, because the velocity of each hi-hat hit is different, when played all together, I feel like they do sound really organic. Oh wait, hang on, I lost your audio. Wait, let me see something. Can you say something? Nope. Still don't. Oh, you know what? Say something now.
Hello, hello,
Yes.
hello.
Okay. That's because it wasn't solo isolated. Cool.
Okay.
Um,
um, oh yeah, I was just gonna say that's something I like to do a lot, but also creates kind of like a interesting mix situation is like if I do like a sample, I like to like double like maybe I like the sample, but since it's a sample, I want like to double the kick so it feels like more impactful, or I'm like slightly kind of trying to like sound design the sample by like adding, but
Yeah.
then that's something that I feel like is very beneficial by having you mix, is like I'm not quite sure how to fit those multiple layers, and like especially all just the impact of like multiple kicks and like how that should fit into the mix.
Yeah.
But I think this was all the drums, the relationship between the drums, the lead vocal, and the bass were like obviously the foundation of the song. And I felt like it required a lot of nuance and was why I talked about it so much in those mix references.
Hmm.
So I was super happy with, I really like the way, I do think what you added makes it feel a lot more organic, and also like takes up the right amount of space with the other core elements.
Yeah. Thanks. From a mix perspective, having those individual, like having the kick and snare just to fortify the loop is like is almost essential, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So keep doing that. I can
Cool.
talk a little bit about what I'm doing with the individual drums. Basically, my like with the kick and snare, my goal with both is just to make like I wanted every element in this song to feel as sort of in your face and upfront as possible without being distracting or pulling attention from the lead vocal, but just
Yeah.
for everything to be really textural. And I feel like the snare especially is just like hammering that backbeat and is very sort of like splatty. We can just take a quick look at what I'm doing. Here's the EQ. Here's without. It's really not. It's not making that much of a difference. I mean, this is one of the things where like I'm just moving quickly and kind of shooting from the hip, but in reality, like almost all of the important frequency information in the snare is this entire range, and I'm cutting it all. So in some ways, this is just like turning the entire snare down in a way. And then there's a compressor, and this is like I think where a lot of character from the snare comes through. So here's with, and then without. You know, not a huge difference, but it's basically very slow tag, very fast release. Well, I shouldn't say very slow because this is. I shouldn't say very slow tag because this is still like an 1176 and it's a fast compressor, but a relatively slow tag just to let through the initial transient and that sort of like smack of the snare. And then similarly with the rest of the drums, I'm parallel compressing the whole thing with this guy, which is you can see down here it's a quick recovery. There's no attack setting on this, but basically getting as much sort of a lot of people think of compression as being a like dynamics reducer, and there are compressors that do that, but in this case, like if you can let the transient through and then clamp down but release very quickly, then the differences between your peaks and your valleys is greater, and so you add sort of like glue and dynamics. So I'm doing a lot of parallel processing on all of the tracks, but specifically the drums. I have a parallel compressor and then a parallel drum distortion bus, just really wanting to get like the like splat and the sort of like gluiness out of the kick and snare. So I can just I want to move on to bass, but I can just quickly play all the drums together. And let me just make sure all this stuff is soloed correctly. Okay. So I can play all the drums together with all of that parallel processing, and then I'll mute it, and you should be able to hear a good difference. So that's with all the parallel processing, and then here's without. Obviously, there's a level difference because those things all add gain, but here's with again. To me, again, you can really hear it when the double kick hits with that hi-hat where it just kind of like clips a little bit. So okay, so let's maybe, unless, do you want to say anything else about the drums, or can we move on to bass?
We can move on.
Okay, cool. So this is the only thing you didn't play, right?
Yes.
So this was played by our friend Garrett Chabot. Is that how you pronounce his last name?
I think so.
Okay, cool. I'm realizing now I've like worked with him before. I've spent a lot
Never
of time
said
with
it out
Garrett.
loud.
Yeah.
But anyway, this is like an amazing bass part. To me, like this bass line just does so much heavy lifting for the track in the way that it like,
It
like
does.
the kick drum and the kick is sort of syncopated. The snare is very much not syncopated. It's just like right on the backbeat. And I feel like the bass just dances around everything in such a nice way and gives it this lift. Can you talk about like what the process with this was? Did you just send the track off to Garrett for bass, or were you like, did you sort of instruct him what to do? Or
Honestly, so I did just send him the track with a bunch of texts and talking about it. I sent him this and another song at the same time, and he just like so I knew like live bass. I feel like if I had to choose one thing live, which might be controversial that it's not drums, but at least so far, like live bass has made such a night and day difference.
Yeah.
When I hear it on the track, I know drums would too, but like it's I feel like it does dance. It like slides a little bit and just creates some messiness because I really liked how straight the drums were, but I think having programmed bass or not something that was providing that like ease within those elements was like it was so important. And I think I just sent it to him, and I think I had a MIDI bass in there, which is usually what I do as like a placeholder and also like a guide.
bass,
And
sorry to
then
interrupt, but like a bass
okay.
synth or a bass
Yeah,
guitar.
like a MIDI bass guitar. Like this was like
Sure.
a live sounding MIDI bass on here that I sent him. And what Garrett does, which is so awesome, is he records like two very simple plain one takes, then like two where he starts to incorporate some more fills and maybe stylistic choices, and then he'll do like two or one or two or three where he just does whatever he wants,
Yeah.
adds some more ideas, maybe goes a little overboard. And usually I'm able to take like nearly a whole take of somewhere. It's usually one of like maybe the fifth out of seven or something, and just comp them a little bit. But he just like has such a good understanding of like what a song needs and also like not overdoing it because he's a producer as well. So I think he just
Yeah.
like really understands what the song needed.
And his tone is
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, and it was just the perfect sound. I don't think I even had a lot of effects on it when I sent it to you. Just very maybe some saturation, compression, simple stuff, EQ, but like he just yeah, he
Yeah.
always nails it. And this was just exactly the sound I was wanting.
It looks like I'm using the dry. I just seeing in the file name, and then here's the hidden wet version. So it looks like I'm using the dry version in the mix. For people listening, like you can see over here on the side, all of these like hidden tracks where the gray dots are light gray. Those are wet tracks. So with all the artists I work with, I ask them to send the wet and dry versions of the tracks, because I figure like especially with an artist like Sabrina, where it's like you've taken the mix so far, the sounds are good. Like I would rather just pick up where you've left off as opposed to sort of like peeling everything away and starting from. It just seems counterproductive. So that's something that I recommend for mixers in general. If you're not getting delivered a session in your native DAW, like if I worked in Logic, I would just take your Logic session and work from there. And when
I
people
use
send me,
Ableton, but
oh, you do? Oh, I thought you
yeah.
Logic. Okay. Well, same
But
thing.
anyway.
You know, so, but yes, to your point, I'm using the dry sound. So this is like just, I guess, what Garrett recorded.
Yes.
With whatever comping you've done. So I can go through the processing a little bit. I mean, like the main thing for me, with my approach to the bass was making sure that, like I said earlier, like every little thing was sort of articulated. Obviously the bass provides sort of a low end foundation, but it's a busier part. So I didn't want it to be like, this is something that I think about a lot, is sort of like legislating low end between the kick and the bass. And because the kick is so round and so big in the bottom, and because the bass is so active, like for there to be a ton of sub, I mean the bass still has a lot of low end, but for there to be a ton of subs in the bass would overwhelm it and would just make it feel like it like slow, like you want, like if you have a bunch of ringing down there.
Yeah.
So what am I doing? So there's compression.
Strawberry.
Solo it up. Bypass that. So this is like, to me, it's bringing up the level, but it's also like really accentuating the like sort of like finger pluck on string sound. Like again, the attack transient thing that was coming through with the 1176 on the snare. But this is a much slower compressor, so it's holding the bass level. And then this plugin that I use a bunch on bass, I am actually doing so. If you, so this knob here is like the frequency selector, and then this is the boost knob for it. But this plugin, it's like a Helios channel strip EQ emulation. If you just engage the 60 hertz, even without doing any bass, it adds like some nice bottom end. But then the other thing I'm doing is this 700 hertz boost right here, and I can just bypass this plugin. And then here's width. Just again, like bringing out the articulation of the strings. And then let's see what else. EQ, just cutting out some low mid-range kind of mud. And then this is adding a lot of character, like a lot of saturation. I shouldn't say a lot. It's here's without. And then with. Like the way I think about this, and this is sort of like how I'm approaching, I'll talk about the vocal too later, and sort of saturation, but like I just wanted to like add density to each element, if that makes sense. So that like oftentimes with songs it's like I'm trying to adhere to some sense of like dynamic variation, but with this song I wanted it to feel like, oh, if the if the drums get quiet, something else comes in to like to take their place. You know what I mean? So it's like so that everything is just like up front the whole time, and a lot of that is compression. A lot of it is saturation too. So there's the saturation on the bass, and then the other thing I'm doing is just some widening here. So this is just a send to a widener, and I'm just rolling off low end, saturating it more, and then doubling it. It's not as wide as some bass doublers that I do. Like sometimes I'll go like this, where I like cut out the center channel all the way and widen both sides.
Oh, cool.
But this is something I do on bass. You kind of have to be careful, because if you widen the low end too much, it can smear things. Like you generally want your low end pretty sort of up the middle. But this just adds like some space to the bass without it's basically delay. Let's see, it's 11 milliseconds and 26 milliseconds, split between each side, and then pitched slightly high and slightly right, so it's detuned and delayed. But that's what I'm doing on the bass. Maybe we should just play. There's percussion too, but I sort of think of those as being part of the drum. So maybe we should just play the percussion, bass, and drums together, and just like see how that establishes the groove. Actually, let's do from verse 2, because that's when all the percussion's in. I love these little fills. We didn't talk about them, but I'm hard panning them, and I'm just rolling off low end.
I love fills. I love toms.
Yeah.
That's something. It's so funny, like hearing it all played back in these sections. Like, do you ever? I'm just like, I don't physically remember doing this. Like, once I hear the final song, I'm just like, wow, there's all this stuff in here. Like, I remember once we're talking about it, but it's so funny to. I haven't like listened to it in its parts in so long, is what I mean.
I feel like when I was making my own music, if I ever opened like a session years later, I would be like, oh, that's so crazy. But I feel like because when I'm mixing, I mixed this song in April, I think. And because I've heard it probably like a cumulative like 500 times, I know every single thing that happens. Like,
Yeah, probably more than me.
yeah. Well, the other thing about this song is that I listen to it regularly. Even like I
Oh,
haven't, yeah, like I
thank you.
it's true of a lot of songs that I mix, where like if I like the song, I'll I'll just keep listening to it after I've
Yeah,
mixed it. Like you would think I'd get super tired of it, and everybody that I like share a space with like gets tired of all the songs I mix. They hear it all the time, but like that's one thing about mixing like for a living, is that like my endurance is so high. Like I can listen to any song, like, and I do, like, if there's a song that I like, it's the only song I'll listen to for like several days, and
I do
I'll
that
just do
too.
it on repeat, like 10 times in a row.
Or one
Um,
album for like weeks.
yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, moving on. So we got drums, bass, guitar. No, we've done drums and bass. Now we're gonna do guitar.
Mhm.
And let's just get into it. I'm just going sort of down in the order that my session is laid out, and it's always drums at
Mhm.
the top, always percussion, always bass. Um, any mixers who are listening, like, I'm a huge uh, proponent of templates and of um, doing things the same way every time. Not in terms of processing. Like, obviously, you don't want to take a cookie cutter approach with how you actually mix things, but in terms of your routing and session setup and color coding, like drums are always red for me, percussion is always orange, bass is always blue. And you can see that like my wet guitars are a different shade than my dry guitars, so I always know like, oh, this like very bright green is my dry, and then this sort of like darker green is my wet. So it's just like very easy to navigate sessions when you have sort of like a, a template. So there are three guitars, but really two main rhythm guitars. There's this, which sounds almost like 12. It's not a 12 string, but it sounds kind of like a 12 string.
So the guitar is funny because I think it's like I played the guitar on this and I'm not much of a guitarist, but I play guitar. So I feel like it's funny because I don't utilize guitar in my tracks the way like a real guitarist would because I mean if I had access, if I had like unlimited resources, I would have the best guitarist playing front and center. But it's funny because I think I end up using the guitars more like as a in a way I'd use a pad
It's a pad. Yeah,
rather,
yeah.
yeah, which I just think of it as filling up, taking up space. Like it's not highlighted in the song. It's because when you solo it, I'm like a shit player. But it's and like it's a cheaper guitar, but I do
No, it
really
works.
helps, and it adds like some higher end that I felt like it's so it was so bass heavy before it. It was one of the last things I added actually.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because I'm rolling off a lot of high end, which I can show.
Oh really?
But yeah, but no, this goes back to the thing that I was saying earlier, which is that most of the elements, the piano, the drums, the bass, the vocal, are just like really upfront and defined. But then there are other elements, really just the guitar and the synth, where like if you mute them, you miss them, but they don't,
Hmm.
they don't smack you on the head.
Yeah.
And I think that's cool. So I can show you what I'm doing. It's just compression. It's an LA3A, just kind of taming. So this is an example of a compressor that I do use to kind of like just level things out so that, one chord strum doesn't like poke out too much. I just find that the LA3A is a really sort of transparent compressor. So you can see it's like barely reducing, but then there are some peaks where it's just like kicking in. So it's an LA3A, and then this pretty like severe bandpass filter.
Mm.
So here's without. And then with. And by itself, it sounds kind of it sounds bad is a strong word, but it doesn't sound appropriate by itself. Like if it were just vocal and guitar, and you were
Right.
like, like it wouldn't sound right. But in the context of the mix, it sort of takes a back. Like something has to take the back seat and just add sort of like a harmonic pad.
Right.
And so having
Treating it more like a pad than
treating it more like
fully
a pad.
guitar.
Exactly. And like if there's too much sort of like pick on strings, then your ear is drawn to that, and it just this is sort of like how I'm philosophizing it. Like um, it takes rhythmic focus away from the hi-hat that is occupying all of that sort of rhythmic definition up top. So there's the EQ and then this mod delay, and maybe this is why I'm saying that it sounds like a 12 string, because it's, so this is what you gave me. Comes right up the middle, and then this delay just widens it. It's not actually a delay. It's doing a similar thing to that doubler, where this left channel is just completely dry, and then the right channel is a 16 millisecond delay. So it's not audible delay. It's not like, I think
You can feel it though.
you could feel it. Yeah. I think like generally in my experience, like 30 to 60 milliseconds is sort of like where you start to hear like periodicity in a delay. Anything under that just sounds like a double, or like it's widened. So there's that, and then there's this other guitar, and this one there is more high end, and I'm just rolling off lows and cutting highs. One thing I'll say, because you kind of see it on a lot of the EQ that I do, is like these low roll offs. I talked about this in another mix breakdown video, but I am sort of, there's some people who will always say that you should always roll off low end if it's not a kick or a bass, or if it's not integral to the sound. And then there are other people who say like if you don't hear a problem, then don't process it, because it wastes CPU and it adds phase shift and whatever. And I feel like I sort of fall in the middle, where it's like
I do this on a lot of my tracks in my productions.
You just automatically roll stuff off. Yeah.
On the non-bass kick elements, yeah.
Yeah, my thing with it is like, even if you don't necessarily hear rumble or low end originating from that track in the session when everything's playing together, it's still adding voltage to the mix bus, and that means that your limiter is going to act in a certain way, and if you don't have a sidechain filter, it means your compressor is going to act a certain way. So, even if there's like sort of like low level noise that you wouldn't necessarily hear, I still kind of think it makes sense, but I wouldn't go through kind of like massacring tracks for the sake of just rolling off low end,
Right.
That's like my little spiel on this. And then last guitar thing is this swell. Which I'm again rolling off lows and then doing a doubler again. And this is one where I'm taking down the sort of mid channel, so all you hear is the widened signal. I can play that in the context of the song.
Missing the sunset, I'm not missing that for you.
Okay, so let's play all that stuff together briefly. Cool. Moving on. So the last. Actually, no. We have one more. No, we have several more instrumental elements. Okay, sorry. We have these. I have them in my synth group, but they're a combination of synths and organs. So you have this. Talk about this sound. Is that just like an organ patch in Ableton, or?
Yeah, it's an organ patch in Ableton, or like a, from a Labs plugin or something. I think it had that wavering, like that vibrato, already in it, and I liked kind of like the subdividing that the song does.
Yep.
Like some things are doing these huge smacking like quarter notes, and then I liked how this added to that subtle like bounce.
Yeah,
the track has.
Totally. And then next up is this pad. Again, rolling off low and cutting a little bit of resonance up there. And that's also just a synth in Ableton. Are you almost always using software instruments, or do you have hardware synths and stuff too?
I don't really have hardware synths. I use a lot of software synths. Sometimes they're even like Ableton stock plugins that I just like effects and like kind of sound design to death to my liking. But no, I don't have a lot of hardware. Sometimes I'll record in sounds and like make them into a synth kind of thing. But
Yeah.
yeah, this was definitely just a plugin.
Cool. And then last thing, I have sort of a general sort of thing I want to talk about with my approach to the synths, but I just want to sort of catalog them all first. So there's this last ending pad, sort of organy in nature, but
it sounds like it might be the same pad as the one above. That in my sorry, that one, the middle one that I'm using differently.
Oh, this one.
End.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
So yeah, I'm just boosting high end, cutting a little bit of resonance, cutting low end. The thing I was going to say with my approach to the synths, and I'm curious if the guitar does anything here. Just looking at the panning. I just wanted to talk about panning. A song like this where the element separation is so sort of crucial. I really like playing around with panning. I mean, I always like playing around with panning, and I think that like you can see I'm doing a lot of widening throughout, but I think that a sense of width is just achieved through panning. Like I feel like there's a lot of hype and craze over widening plugins, and you know, it can be dangerous because if you overuse widening, then nothing sounds wide. But for a song like this, I was very keen on having elements be hard panned. So I'm hard panning a lot of stuff. So this organ is not all the way left, but sort of halfway left. But then you can see over the course of the song, it automates so that when this other pad comes in, this what's labeled here as Vox pad, that Vox pad comes in hard right, and then this organ goes hard left. So it's just this two things. It's you know, trying to cater to that idea of element separation, but also just making sure that over the course of playback, you know, you had said this in one of your notes with the reference tracks that the song feels like it develops and sort of unfolds. You know, like the whole song is sort of not the whole song because you have I guess pre-choruses and bridges, but like it is like a repeating loop for a lot of it, and so finding ways to make it feel like it's developing. So yeah, panning on these synths. And it sounds crazy in headphones by itself, but when you bring in, let's just play the instrumental, play everything minus the vocals. Yeah. I'll just go from I'm calling that verse 2. So
Yep.
One thing that I'll say also about my use of widening, like the guitar has the widener on it, that this mod delay doubler that we talked about. Like one of the things that I'm constantly thinking about with mixing is making sure that there are rhythmic and harmonic counterpoints to different panned elements. You know, so like for instance, if there's an organ that's occupying sort of like a lower mid-range heavy frequency range, which there is here, then I want something to be responding to it on the right side, you know, as there is here with this pad that kind of punctuates it. So because during this section here, this, you know, you can see in the pre-chorus, or what I'm calling the pre-chorus, like that section is just drums, bass, and that's when the guitar enters. But there's there's just this this pad organ in that section, like
Drain me, palate cleanse, I crave a compromise.
Like panning the guitar to one side and the organ to the other side, I thought would have been too jarring. So that's where the doubler comes in, right? Like I didn't want the guitar to come right up the center and interfere with the lead vocal. So that's why I'm spreading it. So, okay. Moving on. Let's just look at the time. Okay. Are you good for time?
Yeah.
Good. Okay, cool. So, we have the main piano. I kind of think of this as like a real foundational element because it comes in right at the top. And there's
Definitely.
so much vibe. I know like other songs you've recorded, you have like an old piano and you're like, there's a story about you playing like your childhood piano, I feel like in Thaw maybe.
Yes, there's some. I've kind of done something different every time, but on other songs I have recorded live piano. I'm pretty sure this is. I did not record this live.
Okay,
This is a MIDI piano
cool. It
that
sounds, okay.
I think I have some not entirely, kept tried to keep at least the not a lot of quantization and like I'm not sure exactly which piano I ended up going with, but yeah, it's like foundational, but it's not necessarily featured either. So yeah, I never recorded this live like I did on Thaw.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I you can see here. I remember asking you for a version without reverb.
Right.
And yeah, no, that's it because it was. I think it was a like a piano plugin that I think you had to take
Right,
the
that
reverb
already
off
had some
internally.
reverb in it. Mhm.
Yeah. So yeah, I asked you to take off the reverb just because I wanted to keep everything really dry. I can
Right.
kind of walk through what I'm doing. I'm just again rolling off low end here. Here's without that cut. You can hear there's just low in there that isn't crucial to the sound and that I feel like the bass sort of like takes care of. So low end cut. Here's the LA3A again. This is one of my favorite piano compressors. And the idea, my approach with the piano is that I just wanted it to sound as sort of like parlor piano-y and like a real
Plunky.
plunky upright piano. And so
Yes.
this is again trying to accentuate the front end, this sort of like hammers on strings. Here's with.
Yeah, you can hear the little crunch.
Yeah, well, so there's crunch coming in later actually. Here's without. And here's with. Just that character of the front end. The crunch that you're hearing is coming from this, which is a Neve channel strip emulation, and it's just cranking the input on the preamp. So here's without.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and then with. And again, like the crunch by itself sounds kind of shitty and maybe inappropriate, but in the context of the song, it just adds like the way I think of it is
Variation.
just like variation, yeah, and just harmonic density, you know.
Well, that's what I actually like about the shittiness of my guitar playing is like I actually think those live like the natural harmonic variation of like those live elements and actually some notes being a little bit sharper flat but they're
Yeah.
embedded in and like and even some of the backgrounds I do that I never really like pitch correct those. I feel like it just adds that like natural, I guess I was calling it like messiness in my reference tracks, but like that feeling of fullness and like not everything's like being quantized and pitched where it sounds like kind of clean and empty. Like I like the having the crunch and like the I just keep saying variation, but yeah, randomness that sometimes MIDI instruments like often don't give you.
Okay, welcome back everybody. It's the same video but a new day, like 2 months later, because we had some technical difficulties and then Sabrina went to London and then but here we are. And we're just gonna pick up where we left off. It's just a few more things with the instrumental and then vocals. So just moving on from the piano, we have this harp. And there's not, again, like the theme of this mix is that I'm not doing a whole lot. I'm pretty sure I'm just lowing. Oh no, I'm actually doing more than just rolling off low end. I'm basically filtering it. This harp comes in the instrumental section in the outro, which we'll talk about in a second, but I just want to identify all the elements. So here's the harp. Oops, I'm on pre-roll. Without that EQ. It sound, soloed up by itself, I think it sounds better without the EQ, but the idea of that EQ is to just get it to slot into that section more appropriately, and that's that's sort of an approach that I take with a lot of my mixing, which is like, and I think this is generally a good approach, which is just to be mindful of how often the solo button is engaged and for how long, because you can get something sounding great in solo, but have it sound completely inappropriate for the track. So I'll play it with the track so you can just hear what it sounds like in the context. It's pretty low in the mix, but just kind of swirling in the background. Is that a real harp that you manipulated, or what is that?
No, I don't even know. Sometimes when I'm sending you the stems, I relabel everything so that it makes more sense.
Oh, okay.
And I think I might have even just been calling that a harp because it was harp-like, but definitely was not really. It might be kind of more like a plucky synth that
Okay.
I was kind of using like a harp.
Cool. Yeah, that's interesting how those things change, because like now it's routed to a not synth bus in my mix, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then the last instrumental element also happens in that section, and it's these trumpets. And I can't remember if I already said it on the previous on the first half of this video, but this is like my favorite part of the song. Like this is
I think it's mine too.
this is like what it, because it's so, it just feels like this like release. It's just it feels very cathartic. And I yeah, talk to me. Also virtual instrument trumpets, or they sound to me more like French horns.
Yeah, there was I'm not even sure if they're trumpets or if it was just kind of like a brass like plugin I was using.
Yeah.
It's like even when I was writing the song for some reason during this section, I never use horns either in my songs, but I just pictured like some kind of brass going and
Yeah.
I was super happy with how these sounded because I thought about trying to like get a live recording, but I think for like what it serves the purpose of in the song, I don't like feel like I yearn for it to sound different when I listen. So
I also think
I'm
that
happy with it.
I also think that it like goes back to the thing of sort of walking the line between organic and real versus artificial.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were talking about that with the drums, and sort of sampled versus live. I feel like, to me, from a mixing perspective, like I didn't necessarily try to make them feel more live, but I wanted them to feel more present and sort of grabby, because they are such a central melodic line in that section. I can play sort of before and after. This is what they sounded like by themselves, before any of my processing. Good, but also like round, and especially like going back to finding room for the harp, like in terms of making sure that the trumpets or horns sort of like prevailed over everything else in that section. I felt like they needed to just be brighter and more present and cut more. So one of the things that I often do with horns especially, but also like strings a lot, is excitement, like multi-band excitement. So this is an Ozone exciter. This is actually Ozone 7, but all the 8, 9, and 10 are also good. Here's what that sounds like with that engaged. Bypassed. It's just more forward in the mid-range. And then in EQ, yeah, boosting a lot of highs just for air, and then getting rid of some resonances. So here's what that sounds like. And that's also boosting harmonics that are introduced by the exciter. You know, so like if I had this EQ before the exciter, it wouldn't be as effective. Vitamin, also just boosting high end and air. Here's what it sounds like without. And then with, that's a big heavy lifter. Oops. That hasn't happened in a long time. Hang on 1 second. Just got to change the sample rate. Can you say something?
Yep.
Okay.
Check.
And you can still hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm paranoid now because of last time. Okay, cool. So excitement, and then the last thing in that chain is just a micro shift, and I don't think it's doing a whole lot. Yeah, the mix is below 50%, but it just adds sort of chorusing and space to those trumpets. So let me just play it with all of that engaged. I'm also just going to up. Here's what that sounds like.
What I feel.
And then I'll just play without that processing. There's obviously going to be a level difference, but hopefully this will just show the before and after. So this is what it was. Still like there. It's not like it's totally lost, but it sits more in the track as opposed to coming out, sort of proclaiming itself. And then the last thing is just this little swell going into.
I'm not missing that for you. Learn me.
That little break. So that's the instrumental in its entirety. It's pretty simple, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit as it comes to your sort of arranging sensibilities. But my take on this instrumental is that it does exactly what it needs to, and no less and no more. It's very direct, very to the point. There's not a lot of sort of ornamentation. It's just, and beyond that, the sounds that you do have fit together very, like they like each frequency band sort of slots in. Nothing really steps on anything else. Is that something that you did very consciously, or is that just like your natural sort of arrangement and production I guess technique?
Yeah, I can't remember whether I talked about this already, but I think with this song was kind of like a marker of progress for me as a producer in my head, because I think I used to kind of feel this need to like be technical or almost like intricate, I guess, and like prove that I could produce, especially with songs that are more like electronic leaning, that have like more manipulated sounds, I guess. And this was just something that I always pictured being very simple, and I really didn't want to like cloud the integrity of the song. Like I wanted the song and like the narrative to be the focus, so I just wanted to do just enough that it had like this build and like this release at the end. But I definitely knew that I wanted there to be space from the beginning, and I think it was a matter of just like practicing restraint.
Did you
making
actively bite your tongue? Like, did you have the impulse to add, or was your directive so clear from the onset that you just wanted it to be sparse, that you naturally defaulted to not throwing a bunch of shit at it?
I think the second one that you said, like I think I knew from the beginning what I wanted, but it was one of those ones where I probably listened to it in this finished arrangement for like 2 months, being like, is this done? And every time I tried to add things, even the background vocals in here are way less background vocals than I usually have. But every time I tried to like mess with it or feel like I needed to add things for the sake of adding things, it just felt unnecessary. So I think I was super happy with it in the end, and just needed to like trust that my instinct was correct.
So is that, I guess I'm curious with this one, but also more generally, like, how do you know when a song is done?
That's funny, because I think I just saw your post about like, when do you think a mix is done?
Yeah.
And I think it's the same answer, which is like when I can listen to it as a song and like feel like I'm not listening to each element isolated, and not feel like I'm like analyzing it, but like picture myself putting it on in the car, like as a listener. I'm just listening through a playlist. Is there anything that I feel like is missing, or like anything that needs to be taken out? I feel like actually I'm, compared to other artists that I've talked to with like knowing when it's done, I'm not really like plagued by that. Like I feel like for some reason I'm able to, same with the mixes, even working with you, I feel like I'm usually able to be like, yep, this I can listen all the way through. Nothing's jumping out at me. I can't think of any more notes, I guess is like the
Do you need time for that? Like, I remember when I was making my own music and like, and even with mixing, like you get so close to the thing and you get so familiar with the thing that you anticipate when the horns are going to enter and you know exactly what's doing what when. Like, do you feel like to be able to listen to it as close to as objectively as possible as a song, you need to put it down for a week or 2 weeks or whatever, or do you feel like you can sort of turn off the producer brain and turn on the audience brain fairly quickly?
I think I definitely try not to rush. Like even sometimes with the mix, I have the impulse when I feel like it does sound right after like 1.5 days of going back and forth. I'm just like, it's done. And then
Yeah.
I'm always like, you know what? No, I'm gonna sleep on this for like a few days. And I obviously show it to like a few of my closest friends who's like I feel like would have who have the ear for like listening for if there's anything they that stands out that I've that's become blind to me. And I think that's why I really like handing it off to a mixer since I'm like writing by myself, producing largely by myself, with the exception of like working with instrumentalists, that I am afraid sometimes that I am not no longer able to be like objective about the arrangement or about whatever. But I feel like I do give myself space. Like I'll listen in different settings, I'll like show it to different people. And I've also learned, I think, how to like not just feel like I have to incorporate every single person's note and
Yeah.
sometimes not agree with their notes. Like I feel like it's just been a process of like figuring out how to trust my instinct, but also give myself space to change my mind or yeah.
I feel like I always advocate people send their music to get mixed. And I always say that like I would rather somebody hate something, hate a choice that I make. I mean, obviously, I would rather they love it, but I would rather them hate something than feel lukewarm, because if they hate something, then it means that they know what they want it to be. And so, like, if you get someone else's perspective on a song, which is essentially what mixing is,
Mm-hmm.
um, hearing what a mixer does, even if it's not to your taste or your liking, at least reveals and sort of crystallizes what it is about the song that you think should happen. You know, it's like
Yes.
it's like having a shitty internship. It's like at least now I know I don't want to be in this field or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly. And I think that's also like another random benefit of being my own producer is like I think sometimes artists let know the song isn't done or they're not happy with it, but then they're like, oh, but that'll be fixed when it's mixed, or that'll be fixed when the producer does something else. And I feel like that's why we're also able to move quickly with the mix, is that another thing that I try to make sure I'm okay with when I send off my production is like, am I okay listening to this unmixed? Like
Yeah.
I never want to feel like I know the mix is going to give it like a sparkle and make it feel polished and done, but like I need to feel okay listening to it in my best mix that I was able to do of the finished song. And I think sometimes just based on the way I've heard people talk about it, they're like, oh, but you know, that's gonna be like, I don't think you should ever think the mix is gonna like fix something or like finish something that you feel like is lacking from
No,
what you're sending off.
I totally agree, and I really believe in the power of a strong rough mix, and that's also why I ask for dry and wet stems. I don't know if we talked about this in the first, recording, but
Mm-hmm.
um, there's no point in me, like, if you've spent a lot of time dialing in sounds and getting the rough mix to a place where you feel like it's representative of your vision, there's no point in me then coming in and stripping away all the work you've done. It's about
Totally.
taking it to the next level, but taking what's already there. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, okay, let's move on to the vocal. I just want to look at the meters, and can you say something?
Yep. Check,
Okay,
check, check.
all right, we're still good. So, all right, so vocals. I We'll just start with the lead vocal. I'm not doing a whole lot on this one. Big surprise. Can you just talk a little bit about your vocal recording process? What do you use as a mic? What was the space like for this?
Yeah, I actually recorded these vocals in like a more like soundproofed room. One of my friends had this like was living in this building that had like a music rehearsal space in it.
Mhm.
And it was like very heavily soundproofed. And I was just like, why don't I just record vocals here and see if I like the difference? Because I mostly record in my room, or previously when we were in school in the studios there, which obviously those always sounded great. But I think I just used my SM7B and went there specifically to record these takes and ended up being pretty happy with them. I mean, I definitely comped, but I think a lot of the stretches in this song, since it is kind of like chugging along melodically, like I don't think there were as many comps as usual because I wanted to just have it still feel organic and yeah.
Yeah, well, from a production standpoint, I think having the vocals as dry as possible on this song, from at least from a starting
Yes, for
place,
sure.
is important. Do you tune your vocals at all, or are you like just what you hear is what it is?
I don't put any auto tune or any, I don't use Melodyne or anything like that. I'll more like spot treat if I really like to take, but there was one single note that was pitchy. I'll just like literally in Ableton, like use the detune and like
Yeah,
do it that way. But I never do any like wide over the whole vocal pitch correction.
yeah. I will say, just my perspective as a mixer is that I'm not saying this was the case on this song, but I typically tell people like mixing is not the time for tuning. But the flip side of that is
Mm.
sometimes compression and EQ and just like balancing will bring out tuning issues that might not have previously been heard. So
Yes.
yeah, my I guess my advice to mixers is like as a general rule, I think it's not good to tune, mostly because the more you listen to a vocal, the more desensitized you get to it, and the less sort of it's harder to sort of move quickly and shoot from the hip. So I think it
Mhm.
ends up compromising the final product. But I think that it's also important to be flexible. If somebody asks for tuning notes and spot corrections here and there, that's often just part of the process. But that's not happening here because you're an amazing singer.
Thank you.
And yeah, I can just go over my chain. Basically, um, let's just look at it. It's a 1176. And typically, what I'll have a lot is I'll use an 1176 with like a slow attack, fast release, just to kind of make the vocal feel grabby and energetic, and then I'll pass it into a slow, more like an optical style compressor. Also, oh, you're there. I thought you froze for a second.
I did, but I'm back now.
Did you hear? Could you hear that or?
I not after you open the compressor, but
Okay, cool. I was just gonna say, typically my vocal chain is a fast FET style compressor, like an 1176, going into a slower optical compressor. I am a big fan of the TubeTech CL1B, but I'm actually not doing that here. What I'm doing here is just the 1176 and then parallel compression to get some of that sort of consistent level and presence. So it's a LA or a 1176 CLA 76 with a medium slow attack, medium fast release, and that goes right into an EQ. There are two dynamic bands in the mid range and lower mid range, just dealing with if there's if there are resonances that sort of poke out in those ranges. That helps. A little cut in the mid range, just probably for harshness, and then a boost in the high end, just for air. I can bypass. I'll bypass the parallel chain too. So here's what the vocal sounds like without any insert processing, still with reverbs and delays. But
Strawberry, California, 7 hours on the plane.
And then here's with compression.
Strawberry, California, 7 hours on the plane. I'm still thinking about you.
Just brings forward the sort of low level information, some of the consonants and the crispness of the beginnings of words, and then EQ takes takes rid of some of the sort of boxiness.
Strawberry, California, 7 hours on the plane. I'm still thinking of.
And then we go into this. I know this has made an appearance on a lot of other elements. This is just a Neve style channel strip, boosting into the preamp for just a little bit of breakup. My typical move with this on vocals, if I'm going to use it on a vocal, is to boost the preamp until there's audible distortion and then roll it back. And then it looks like I'm not using the compressor on this. I'm just using the EQ for a little high shelf boost up at 16K. And then finally there's a de-esser. This is this was made in, I believe, the early 2000s, and it's still a great de-esser. I use it all the time. And my thing with de-essing vocals is I typically find de-essing to be more transparent when it affects the entire frequency spectrum, meaning that the input trigger is still set to a specific frequency, but instead of only spot reducing that frequency when the de-esser kicks in, it's reducing the entire the level of the track, basically. So it's basically a compressor, but that is sensitive to a certain range. You could almost think of it as like a regular compressor where the side chain is just a very narrow band. So that's what's happening here. And then I have parallel compression, and it's this RS-124 compressor. I don't know why this is yelling at me. It's an RS-124 compressor, which is an emulation of a famous modified Altec compressor that they had at Abbey Road and recorded a lot of the Beatles with. And to me, there's a similar unit on the background vocals, but to me, this just adds sort of presence and also sort of graininess and character to the vocal. So that's happening in parallel. So in addition to the main vocal processing, this is happening in the background. And then you can just see that this can bring out a lot of mid-range. So I'm just cutting some of that harshness right around 4K and then rolling out lows. So here's what that sounds like by itself.
Strawberry, California, 7 hours on the plane. I'm still thinking.
And that's where a lot of this sort of like gluiness of the vocal comes from. And I actually think on the first mix I sent, I think you said the vocal was too compressed.
Yeah, I think that was like the words I was using to describe what what I felt, even if that wasn't the case.
No, I think it was, and I think I ended up I probably turned down the parallel compression. The idea behind parallel compression is that you sort of hold a vocal level, like you flatline a vocal level or any instrumental level, so that there's not a lot of dynamic variance, and then when you blend in the dry, uncompressed signal, that's where the sort of dynamic fluctuation comes in. The way I look at it more is that it's just another way to add character and sort of vibe to a vocal. So that's what I'm doing here. And then there's a parallel compression / saturation scheme happening.
California.
I don't know if you can hear that on your end. It's pretty low level.
Yeah.
But this is, again, the Neve channel strip with the gain boosted all the way. So it's just completely destroyed. Compression going crazy, no EQ. And then I'm micro shifting it, so it's just spread left and right, just so it's not clogging the main sort of pristine, clean vocal. And then band passing highs and lows. And basically what I find this does, it doesn't read necessarily as audible distortion, but it does add a density to the vocal that I think is important. Yeah, warmth, and especially if the vocal is traveling a lot throughout the frequency range. I find that this provides, because it's so compressed and it's filtered, it just provides like a steady state amount of sort of like just low mid reinforcement that is helpful. So without I'll just play without all the parallel stuff. Without the parallel processing, it sounds like this.
Strawberry, California, 7 hours on the plane. I'm still
And then with
Strawberry, California, 7 hours on the plane.
not a huge difference, but it definitely just brings the vocal forward, I think. And then the last thing I'm doing on the lead vocal bus is just, this is something that I do on almost every mix, which is just automating. I pull up an EQ, instantiate a bunch of bands, and we'll just go through in touch mode as the song plays down, just adjusting. If there's a resonance on a word here or there, I'll just pull it out. If there's, something that gets lost or needs to be boosted, I'll boost it. So you can see if I kind of click around the timeline on the song, there are just little cuts happening here and there for certain words. And then the whole thing is automated. And one of the things, I won't get too much into this, but it's important to know where your automation is taking place in the context of the vocal chain. You can see here, like this is the vocal track that actually contains the audio, and all the automation that I do here, it happens pre-compression, meaning that if I take down the level here, it's not going to hit the compressor as hard, and then the compressor won't necessarily act on a certain word. And then down here, all of this automation that you can see kind of drawn in is post-processing, and so the compressor doesn't care about what's happening here because it's already doing its job. So I always try to be mindful. Another way to mess around with this is to automate thresholds on compressors. That's something that I'll do fairly frequently. But yeah, so that's the lead vocal. In terms of effects, I think I had talked about this in the previous video. I wanted overall the sound of this song to just feel dry and very upfront, in your face, sort of focused. But ultimately, if you have everything completely dry without any reverb or delay, you run the risk of everything sounding flat and losing depth to the mix. So my approach with processing on this was to sort of split the difference between your rough mix, which I think was more reverberant, and a completely dry mix. So I'll just show what I'm doing there. So let's see if I mute all the pre-effects. So that's all of the reverbs and delays that I'm doing. I have a deverb, just like stock Pro Tools, short, 80 millisecond sort of room style reverb. I have a tape slap, and then a longer slap here, and then another sort of reverb treatment that I have are these two mono plate reverbs, and I use this on almost every mix. Basically, this helps me achieve a plate reverb sound that's really wide, and I use it in very varying degrees in different mixes depending on how dry or wet it needs to be. But essentially, I'm sending the vocal to each of these, but I'm panning them hard left and right. So they are both plate reverbs that are set to fairly similar settings. They're both 2-second plates, but they're different plugins, and so they sound, the actual characteristics of the reverb are different. And so by having those two playing at the same time, you don't feel like you're getting pulled in one direction because there's a mono reverb all the way off to the left, but there's enough variation between the sounds of the reverbs that it ends up sounding very wide. So that's what I'm doing there. And then throughout the song, and this is something that's really important, is I'm just automating different, like you can see here, there are some long reverb throws, another long lexicon that happens in the pre-choruses and the choruses, and then I'm also automating ascend to a 16th note delay. And this is really important for for vocals in general is just changing the perspective from section to section, so it's not just one thing throughout. And my goal with all of this, unless it's a stylized throw of some sort, is not for this type of thing to be super noticeable. In fact, if it is noticeable, I think it's a problem. But if the perspective is sort of shifting throughout the course of the song, it hopefully keeps the listener engaged on a sort of subconscious level. So I can just I'll play a little bit of that. Right, so you hear this sort of swimmy delays now and a longer reverb. And
I'll put down my devices.
then
I'll
with the
cry for half life.
So that's the lead vocal, and then background vocals. Did you record background vocals in the same session, in the same room, or?
I was thinking of whether I did because I don't remember what I mentioned last time, but I this song used to be a half step higher. And I feel like when we listened to the background vocals, I realized that I just pitched some of them down, like
Oh, yeah.
temporarily, and ended up keeping some of them. So I think I might have re-recorded some and pitched down others, but like kind of liked the way it sounded, kind of like warped, or I forget the exact quality. But yeah, and they're much less vocals than usual. So I think some of them were in my just rough demo,
Yeah.
and then some were re-recorded that needed to be.
I feel like they're very textural, and they provide a nice sort of like textural like counterpoint to the lead vocal. They're like kind of gritty. The thing that I was going to say before about the RS-124 is that I'm also using a TG-12345, which is also another EMI. This is a channel strip, but I use it for the compression mainly. And this is super gritty and adds a lot of sort of mid-range bite, which I felt like was important because I wanted the background vocals to feel not ugly, but like not too pretty, not too clean, to be sort of like a little rough around the edges. And this helps with that. There are basically 3 background vocal stacks that are happening. I can just play up the first one.
I couldn't speak.
So in terms of my processing, it's EQ. I don't know what this is. It's adding mid-range presence. It's a very sharp cue. It's like sharper and narrower than I would typically do. But I'm cutting lows and low mid-range, and then that feeds into this compressor.
I couldn't speak.
If I go to
I couldn't speak.
yeah, pretty straightforward, and then it's going to a long haul. My guess is that is a where's my long haul? Yeah, pretty much a stock vintage verb, just with the decay time taken down. And then the next background vocal stack is these. Again, not really doing anything to the individual parts, but I am processing on the bus that those are all getting sent to. And again, in this case, I'm compressing before my EQ. And I'm also, you can see I'm compressing in mid-side mode, which is something that I do a lot for background vocals. I'll either live in duo mode or mid-side mode. Duo mode is, if you have something panned hard left and hard right, which I do with these background vocals. If you're in stereo compression, the left channel will respond to whatever the right channel is doing. So if there's a loud sound in the right channel, both channels will duck to compensate. Whereas duo is the left and right are independent of each other. So it helps, if there's a background vocal phrase that in one side that just pokes out, it operating in duo mode will take that down and sort of even out the image of the left and right background vocals. So I'm in that a lot. And then mid-side mode, I always like to try it because it does a similar thing where it compresses the center and the sides independently of each other. But in this case, I think I'm using mid-side on the whole song because on all the background vocals because it just makes things sound wider. I can play. Here's mid-side. So here's what I'm doing, and then I can play it in stereo. And then stereo would be. Mid-side. It's subtle, but I find that the sides are that the image feels wider to me.
It's funny,
So,
I literally never do just like I always double every part at least. So I think I had tried doing that, but I kind of liked how this was kind of like this. Like I kind of liked how you could hear the individual parts rather than making like this chorus kind of background vocal, which is what I do a lot.
yeah,
Yeah, but
I agree, and we can
interesting.
solo up some of these because I think this might be the one that you pitch down. No, it's not. It might be these ones.
I
That
wonder
are,
which one it is.
I think it's here. Let's listen. I think it might be.
Oh, I think it's at the very end, the ooze.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, what is that?
No, but it works. Because again, like you don't hear any of this in the.
Exactly.
You know, you might be able to hear the individual part, but you can't necessarily discern the tonality of it super specifically.
Definitely.
And again, yeah, to your point of wanting to hear each background vocal, like if I took a more sort of like pristine like pop approach to this, I would probably have aligned all of them to get everything really tight. I would have EQ'd and compressed each one and paid closer attention. But
Mhm.
I just like the grittiness that the bus compression adds, and it's not too clean, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, and then this last background vocal section is just the same thing. It's an EQ, in this case, sort of boosting some of that almost like telephony, like mid range into the TG 1 2 3 4 5 on mid side mode, in compression mode, and then going to a short tape slap and then that long haul, and then here's what that outro instrumental section sounds like. So I'm just gonna play a clip of everything with everything, you know, unsoloed, and then I just want
Mhm.
to talk briefly about mix bus processing, and then we'll wrap it. But here's what all the vocals sound like in.
Strawberry, California, 7 hours.
Cool. I love that section. That might be the favorite like section of yours that I've ever worked on.
Thank you. Maybe me too.
Really? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's just
I just it came out exactly like how I pictured it, like while
mm,
I was writing it. And like had my like a lot of unconventional parts that I wouldn't normally think to add, so I was happy with it.
well, I just love how you have two such strong melodic lines. Like you have the vocals sort of doing like
Like
runs and
going like
ad libs.
this.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
sort of like it's like counterpoint, but you
Like
have the
like
horn
that.
line. Yeah, I don't know. I
Not
took
both up.
AP music theory, and that was as far as I got. But um, but yeah, it's like again, nothing interferes, but it's all it just lives. It coexists so well. it just, that section is so cool to me. So, okay, the last thing I want to talk about is just mix bus processing, and there are a couple things. The first one is that there's parallel saturation on the entire mix, and that is with this plugin from Baby Audio called Tape. And you can see that the glue is turned up all the way. That's essentially tape compression. Here's what it sounds like by itself. Just really trying to accentuate that like splattiness, especially from the snare, and just the gluiness of the mix. Usually what I'll do is I will drive this like crazy hot so it sounds almost like that parallel distortion aux return that I had on the vocal, and then I'll widen it. But because this song was so sparse and because the transient preservation was so important, I'm not doing that. I'm just using this as a sort of parallel compression on the mix bus. And then I'm going into basically just some EQ and compression. This is on the mix bus itself, and it's basically just a smiley face curve, meaning it's just a boost in the low end and a boost in the top. Looks like 10K, and a 60 hertz boost. And I'll just play that. I'll just A-B. So without that, sounds like this. And then with. Just bringing out air in the vocal and the hi-hat, really. Those are the main high-frequency elements that are happening. Into an SSL compressor. Hardly doing any reduction, maybe a dB here and there. Slow attack, fast release. Again, like the vocal compression scheme, slow attack lets through the initial transient and then it clamps down so that you get this sort of like push and pull happening with the compression. It's on a ratio of 4. This is just my default setting for this. And typically with mix bus compression, I'll just I have default settings for all of my mix bus compressors, and if the default setting doesn't work and I can't get it within 10 to 20 to 30 seconds of tweaking, I'll just move on to another to try something else. Usually I find that this SSL style compressor responds better to up-tempo music, sort of like dancier music, or really where the drums are hitting hard. I like this one a lot. And then it's just going into another EQ, which is just boosting. This is a mid-side EQ. It's really just boosting high shelf at 7K, more in the sides than up top, but it's boosting high frequencies across the mix and then cutting a little bit in the low end just on the sides, just to sort of tighten up the low end image. And then it's going into this limiter that I was using a lot at the time. I still use this occasionally. It's called Elevate by Newfangled Audio. I think I had just gotten it when I was mixing this. But you can see I'm not doing a whole lot of gain reduction. Again, this is something to be mindful of when mixing, because I feel like some genres and some arrangements and some productions can really take a lot of limiting before they start to break, whereas others, I think it's important to know the limit, because this song is so punchy and the drums are so they need to be loud and upfront. Limiting it into oblivion would have compromised it. So I took sort of a conservative approach to my limiting. And nowadays, when I send stuff off to mastering, I'll send a limited pass and an unlimited pass anyways, so that the mastering engineer can hear what we've been hearing, which is the limited version, but then they can make their own sort of adjustments. But yeah, that's the whole track. Do you have anything that you want to add before we wrap it up?
I don't think so. No.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you again for doing this. I really appreciate you taking the time now 2 times to do it. And why don't you plug your EP? I don't know when this is gonna be released? If it's, I'm assuming that we'll release it after the EP comes out, because the EP
Mhm.
comes out this Friday. So do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah, this song, even though I've been releasing singles throughout the year that are basically culminating in the CP that has one more song, that comes out Friday, and you mix the whole thing, and I'm super excited about it. And yeah, that's basically I have like the last video and song of the year coming out Friday, so I'm
Amazing.
super
That's
excited.
so exciting. So by the time this is live on YouTube, that will be out. So I will post a link in the description. And yeah, if this is your first time hearing Sabrina, I highly recommend going back and not only listening to this EP, but listening to her whole catalog, because it's awesome and it's exciting to see you doing what you're doing. And I feel like every song I mix and every project I mix for you, just like it just keeps growing and getting better and better. So I'm excited
Thank
to be
you.
involved, and thank you for having me mix this one.
Yeah, thanks for having me for this breakdown and for mixing everything.
Yeah, my pleasure.